Today we're very lucky to have Guardrails AI CEO here on stage and Yahoo's director. We're gonna talk about AI safety and how to really balance this with speed. But before we get there, I just wanted you to introduce yourself. Go ahead, Shreya.
Hey everyone, my name is Shreya. As Rami mentioned, I'm the CEO of Guardrails AI. Guardrails AI is primarily a company focused on building platforms to add AI reliability and controllability to any generative AI applications that you're building. We're primarily an open source company with an enterprise offering as well. Before starting Guardrails, I have worked in machine learning for 10 years across research and computer vision, classical AI and planning, etc. Self-driving cars for a number of years before that. And then I guess like everybody else here, tour and MLOps as well. Yeah, awesome.
Hi, everyone. My name's Erica. I'm an engineering director at Yahoo. I manage a team that owns recommendation systems and other AI ML applications. At Yahoo, specifically focused on news, so content recommendations. I've worked in this industry almost 15 years, back when we trained machine learning models ourselves. I've worked across media and e-commerce, mostly on consumer products, and excited to be here and chat about, speed and safety.
Awesome, thank you so much. I'll give a quick introduction about myself too. My name is Remy. I'm leading growth at Vectis. We're a documentation platform for machine learning and AI. And I also lead a community of AI leaders of over 1,300 director plus executives all across enterprises in the US, specifically in AI. So today, I'm super excited about the fact that we get both on-the-field experience about the topic and also a vendor here, which at the same time has kind of this broad view of all the companies they've been working with. So I'm very, very excited about hearing about this complementarity of the two profiles here. I want to start by defining AI safety. I think starting off with definitions is always a great way to start. So yeah, Erica, if you want to start with that, what does that mean for you?
Sure, and I would love your answer as well. So I asked for us to start this question with a definition because I think this term means different things to different people, and I guess I wanted to start out with the call out that this is not AI safety conversation, like the robots are gonna take over the world, unless you want to talk about that. But I don't really want to talk about that. I don't think it's really relevant to us living on Earth right now. But I do think that there are real risks to these products. There's always risk to any sort of company. There's certainly risk to tech companies. And as we add more and more complex technology quickly, there's sort of more and more risks, and we have to be thoughtful about it. So I would say for broadly risks, and the other thing I wanted to say is that it's contextual to the industry that you're working in, and certainly if you're working in self-driving cars, there are very large risks, as we heard this morning from the CEO of Cruise. But there's risks in other areas as well. I mean, I work in media right now, and there's a real risk if you're auto-generating summaries, auto-generating content or headlines, that you might give people misinformation about the election or something like that, right? Like if you tell people that the polls are closing at a different time than they are actually closing, and you send that out to a bunch of people in Wisconsin or Philadelphia, that has real risk. So I think safety and risks are not just confined to industries where you could cause like physical harm. Yeah.
Yeah, I really want to underscore that safety, AI safety especially, is very, very context dependent. I think like a widely or a very commonly used definition of that is something that the Senate bill in California, SB 1047 talks about, which is essentially, it's very specific to very specific to models, and it's very specific to very concrete harms in terms of is this model going to make it very easy for an average person to look up how to create weapons of mass destruction or bio warfare or increased cybersecurity risks, etc. So that's a very specific narrow definition of safety, but often how you're using these models, right, is within the context of an application. And so safety becomes okay, I have a chatbot or I have a news summarizer, right? Is this news that somebody who maybe doesn't understand the nuances of a specific AI system, if somebody like that comes onto my platform, are they just going to verbatim trust everything I produce? And then as the generator of that news, then, what's the responsibility on me? So factuality, not adding any types of bias into your predictions, et cetera, is like kind of what that definition evolves to if you look at it outside of the model and within the context of an application. And then that really varies upon, what your application is, what your domain is, et cetera.
Amazing, thank you. So now I want to ask you a question, Erica. In your experience, you've been working at many enterprises, and you've been going from traditional machine learning to LLMs. And I'd like to know what's changed in terms of approach to safety.
Yes. So I think that the thing that's changed predominantly is that executives want to launch things quickly. I felt like in my early part of my career, it was a lot about convincing people who had never heard of this to use it and that it could work. And I was constantly pitching people on projects and they were like, man, I don't know. Is this really important? I don't think it's going to work. And now there's all this top-down pressure, right? So we used to be able to actually be much more measured, and we had to make a case for it working, and now we have to make cases for not launching it because it doesn't work. And that has been a real shift in the approach and the landscape. And so I actually, just today, I wasn't working because I was here, but I killed a project successfully that I thought was a really, really bad idea. So normally I was on the other side of that argument, and now I'm on this side. And that's been the biggest change for me. Yeah.
And as you were building those projects now, we touched on the communication, the drivers behind those initiatives. What on the field, the way you develop models, the way you design those systems, what has changed?
Yeah, I mean, to state the obvious, we used to have to train the models and get the data and have expertise in machine learning. I mean, that's what my background is in statistics and in convex optimization. And you don't need that anymore. You just need to call an API. And so it's completely, as you say, democratized, opened up who can build AI applications. There's good things about that. There's bad things about that. But yeah, anyone can do it. And in many ways, people who have no machine learning background do it much more quickly because they don't even think they don't even know that you can tune certain parameters. They just plug it in and launch it. So that's the primary thing that's changed. I mean, you don't need to own the models, but it's not that everything has moved that way. I mean, many things, I own a big recommendation systems for content, like those are still trained on our own data that you don't want to, on every single request, go and call OpenAI or something like that. But yeah, it's opened up a whole new area of applications that work and you can do, fairly cheaply. It's cool. So.
Yeah, I guess just to interject there, I think from a safety perspective, what's novel for this current era of machine learning, which is very LLM, Gen AI driven, is that the surface area of what your task means is just so much broader than what it would be in the past, right? Like for recommendations, it would be this very, very kind of well-defined, well-scoped out task, which is, here's a list of things and then rank them or something, right? I'm oversimplifying, obviously, but I think now you have I'm sure a lot of people here are familiar with Devin, which is this AI junior software engineer, and you give it an abstract task and it'll go inside your GitHub repo and write up a PR for you, right? That the surface area of everything that task touches is so broad, and that means that what correctness means or what it means for this AI system to do this task well is just very ill-defined, right? It's a very complex kind of function to define that well. And that means that now to figure out is this autonomous system that I'm trusting, is it doing the right thing, is much, much harder to solve compared to the previous generation of machine learning where tasks would be much smaller.
So now that the ecosystem changed and there's a whole new domain that opened, how do you keep track of all the new things that come up? How what do you try? What do you not try? How do you manage the FOMO? So I'd love to get your input, Erica first, and then Shreya also, kind of from a vendor perspective, how do you help companies kind of navigate this new space?
Yeah, I guess the FOMO is real. Things are moving so quickly. Personally, I go through phases of digging into the details and then building, and it's really hard to build things while also digging in. So I can't personally focus that much on both things at the same time. I'm in the very much applied space. A lot of the activity right now is going on in, you call foundational models, scaling these models, the hardware, super interesting, totally irrelevant almost to my day-to-day job. And so the truth is that you don't need to follow all of the twists and turns. And if you kind of don't pay attention for a few months, a company could be started, founded, funded, and fail before you even know that you had to pay attention to them. So like, I think there's just a lot of noise. There's a lot of noise. I asked a friend of mine who's very balanced. He's a machine learning engineer, very competent, but very balanced, not into the hype. And I asked him last week how he deals with the FOMO and how he pays attention to the industry. And he says, there's one newsletter. Every Friday I open it. I post 2 things that they post into our company Slack, and my manager loves me. So I do think that is probably sufficient. Maybe that's bad advice, but yeah, that's my own.
I hope the newsletter is the MLOps newsletter. Yeah, I guess I do, work in this area where you have this like fire hose of like new developments all the time, and it's my work is very like LLM focused, and it helps to have a short attention span, and like be able to kind of like split attention across like a bunch of different things. I think it's like there's no really good answer. I think there's like a few newsletters that I really like. There's a few, LinkedIn accounts, Twitter accounts that I really like. There's a few like company blogs that I watch like a hawk. Some subreddits that I think are really high value. Shout out to r/local llama, which I kind of watch like a hawk, which is fantastic. I think there's a lot of like just being keyed into the right communities, and honestly, MLOps is like a great place to do that. Yeah, that's kind of my answer. There's no secret sauce. You just watch like some people that are really high signal, and then kind of like focus on those. Yeah.
Amazing. So I want to touch now a bit on how do we take care of safety first, very quickly upstream of the model with you, Erica, and then we can like dive much deeper into downstream of the model. So, Erica, what do you put in place? What do you pay especially attention when it comes to the data? Like we talked earlier in this conference about RAG system, etc. Like the data that is fed or that the model has been trained on, etc. Like how do you manage the risk associated to this?
Right. So I'm for LLMs. Like I'm not training LLMs, to be clear. We're training traditional machine learning models and neural networks. We're using LLMs. I have no idea what these things are trained on. Lots of copyright data, likely. So I think that when you're thinking about like risk or safety, you need to define the harms, right? You need to think about what could possibly go wrong and essentially like do a pre-mortem on what the application is and think outside the box. Like if you are a reporter reporting on this company and this feature, and you want to try to like poke a hole in it and write a tell-all investigative piece, what are you going to start looking for? What are the edge cases? Like people who work at newspapers who write all these stories or who work at the Markdown or something, they're not about how all these systems fail. Like they don't have some special sauce, right? They just like think and try it and think about the worst case scenario. And so there's no reason you can't do that. And so it's shocking to me how many companies get caught like left-footed on these applications because there's no secret sauce. You can also sit down and think about how these applications could go sideways. Anyway, how Google does not get people to do this correctly, it just blows my mind. And yeah, that's what you have to do. You have to be really, really thoughtful. And I think you need people in the room that have different backgrounds than you. You need open brainstorming sessions. You need an environment where people feel comfortable to raise concerns at any point in the project. There's no like right or wrong answer about the data that goes into it. It's about how you structure the system and how you integrate the kind of AI ML component. And I'll just give one quick example. Again, contextualize safety, right? So this is, again, not killing people, but I used to work at the New York Times, and I worked on comment moderation. And the New York Times used to moderate all their comments by hand. So there's a team of people who they moderate the comments. If you write a comment into the New York Times, someone would read that comment and would have to approve it before it got posted to the website. So like pre-moderation. And we had a great data set to train these models on, and we trained a model and we implemented like a AI augmented system. And we were thinking about how to design it. And the biggest concern, the biggest risk to us was that some voices of our readers would be automatically declined, automatically rejected, and we would not know about it. That the system would maybe learn that comments about race or comments about homosexuality or something like that had a higher likelihood of being toxic and would just automatically reject them even if they weren't inappropriate, and that those voices would be silenced. So we built the system such that it would never auto-reject. It would only auto-accept, and if something got through that was not good, it would be flagged by people and then it could be taken down. But that was it was about the mechanism of creating the system and not about the data specifically it was trained on. We did see in the end that some of that data was biased and we were able to correct for that, but we thought about it ahead of time and that was the key thing. Yeah.
So Shreya, if we look at downstream of the model, like how would you categorize the main risk that people experience?
Yeah, I think it's actually weirdly parallel, right? Which is that how do you even think about so the risks are very different, like depending on the application, depending on the domain. If you're a financial institution doing like customer support with AI chatbots, your risk profile is going to be really, really different than, like a consumer tech company that's building like an internal, employee knowledge QA bot thing, right? So depending on that, the risks are really different. But I think like the key challenge, if you're thinking about risk, is still the same, which is that somebody has to really like understand the system, understand your downstream like stakeholders and use cases and domains, and then come up with like some opinionated manner of like, these are the things we care about. Like hallucinations is like almost like a buzzword. Like people talk about hallucinations so much as the failure mode of large language models, but for a lot of use cases hallucinations might not be bad, or like an organization has to decide if hallucinations are bad for them and what can they really do. So just kind of like sitting down ahead of time and thinking about how bad is it for us if our system or chatbot or something hallucinates, versus how bad is it for us if we accidentally leak some information that we're not supposed to. Somebody has to come up with that determination. There's a bunch of different frameworks that help you do this. I think the NIST AI RMF is like one of the ones that comes to mind. ML Commons, the same guys that do ML Perf, like the ML Perf benchmark, are also coming up with an AI safety. I forget, like AI safety benchmark or taxonomy or something. So that is a good full set of everything that can go wrong and that you have to kind of like think about. We, at Guardrails, we released this thing called a Guardrails Hub, which is basically for all of the different types of AI risk. These are the guardrails that you care about. And we thought, okay, it's the actual like guardrail or asset, the code asset that verifies your risk. That'll be interesting for people. But actually, it's just the enumeration of, all of these types of risks that product developer or AI developer should think about that, people end up finding really interesting. So yeah, I think it's like mimics a lot of what you see upstream of the model.
Yeah, I'd also add that I think about risk as risk the whole company, like how much risk is the company entirely taking on, not just the AI systems, right? So if your company has a negative impact on somebody in a real material way, they do not care if there was like an LLM in the code path that resulted in that. They don't care if there was AI in that code path. And I think that we can also use, and this is not generally part of the conversation, but we can also use AI to de-risk the companies in general, right? Like it doesn't always need to be adding risk. It can also be taking risk away. And so one example of that is I used to work at Etsy. Etsy, it's UGC essentially. Anybody can upload items and sell it on Etsy. And they have a real problem of people uploading items that are against policy. One thing is that there's this category that we refer to as baby bling. So people would like create toys and bottles and whatnot and bejewel them and then sell them on Etsy. And this is really bad. Don't do this because it's a choking hazard for children. And so there was a team that would try to find the baby bling on Etsy. They would be much more aided if they had some image models to help them. And so you could actually use AI to de-risk the entire company. So I do think we should think about it on both sides of the equation.
And Shreya, in your experience, like what are the main like use case that you've seen where it's been applied and where like people really put like metrics and frameworks in place? Could you have a couple of examples to share?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think use cases. So again, like I guess I'm talking from the perspective of the current era of machine learning, which is very very massively driven by LLMs, and not about a lot of the work that I used to do in the past about self-driving and other kind of like different sets of ML problems. I think if you're specifically thinking about LLMs, most of the use cases that are successfully deployed end up being very constrained use cases. So use cases that are typically behind, one layer of like protection. So for example, a lot of people have, support chatbots, which are guarded by an actual human that gets the final say of like, yes or no, is this okay or not to kind of like send forward. A lot of those use cases end up kind of like making it too broad. I think like some of the other ones are, very internal, question answering, like asking questions about your HR policies, et cetera, so employee question answering. In terms of like the metric, like the evals and the metrics that people care about, I think you're kind of like circling like what the big unsolved question in LLM land. I haven't counted, but I don't know how many talks today were about LLM evaluation. So I think it is an evolving conversation. I think like people have like some ideas of what works well or not. I think one thing we know for certain is what worked for the ML 2.0 landscape, which is very deep learning driven and very like kind of static metrics, etc., is not as applicable in LLM land, because even if you have ground truth, and you can like even comparing ground truth with like prediction is really hard because the tasks are really really hard. So some general principles for evaluation that work well is setting up your system so that you are accurately collecting human feedback and then looping that in and essentially using it to update like specific parts of your pipeline, like retrieval or generation or prompting, etc. But I think evals are I think they are the kind of like big problem of our times. Yeah.
Erica, earlier during the conversation, you talked about kind of killing projects which were not suitable. We talk about balancing speed and safety here. So when speed exists, the product has not been killed. How do you put the cursor? How do you select like how much work to put, how much time to put into the safety compared to just shipping the product as soon as possible?
Yes, it's a good question. Good question. I think a lot of these applications, you can get a demo going really fast. So you might as well get a demo going really fast. And you might as well, it's good to get as many eyes on it as possible to start to define a rubric for how to evaluate whether it's working or not. And having a rubric for what is really bad, right? So I think one of the themes that I think is emerging from all this evaluation work is that it's good to have tiers of your test cases. Not every test case is the same, right? So you really want it to work on the easy examples, and it better be really, really good on the easy examples. And then there's the hard or the wishy-washy, people don't agree on them. And then there's like the really bad examples, or it would be very bad. So you need to start, but you really need to get in the data deeply and have a lot of people looking at it, not just the engineers. So bots that push the responses to Slack channels, send emails every night or something to get people looking at it. This stuff is so cool and looks so magical, and it's so tempting, I think, for people like us who have worked like in the trenches of this industry for so long when it didn't really work, to be excited to handpick the examples that are working and be like, oh, like CTO, how cool is this? Like, we can do this now. Make a demo with these handpicked examples, and then they're like, great, ship it. But actually that was 1 in 10, and the 9 other examples don't really work, right? So I think we have to temper our enthusiasm a little bit and be really honest when we show people examples. So like the project I killed, sorry, I keep mentioning this, but this project I killed today, I was like totally guilty of this. I found some really cool examples. They wanted to like auto write some headline and auto generate some images and personalize it for everybody about news stories. And it worked great on a few examples with a few hand-tuned prompts, with a few hand-chosen news stories. And then I was like, I really should look on this on like 100 examples randomly chosen, look through it. And there was a bunch of examples where the summarization misstated the headline. And it said like, so-and-so canceled the tour. Willie Nelson canceled his tour because he's sick or something. And then the summary was that he didn't cancel the tour and he's having like a cancer tour or something really bad and really wrong. And I put that's how I killed the project, because, there's no way to test that. And these models are really bad at news, breaking news, misinformation, because they don't know what's like happening right now. So I think if the project is really not super risky and you feel comfortable with it, then just like get your hands in the data and come up with a rubric for evaluation.
Shreya, how do you guide your partners, customers on that balance in between safety and speed journey?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think a lot of my view, and this might be, the unpopular view, but unfortunately, a lot of this trade-off, right, is like it's almost like a product trade-off, and there's no one right answer for what's safe for one person versus another. So, in general, like what I really recommend is like as you're kind of like, when you're doing the scoping of what this product should kind of like look like, right? It's like, okay, what are the inviolatable conditions for me as somebody who owns this feature or this, this application that wants to, wants their users to be successful with this application? What are the inviolatable constraints for me? Like, what behavior do I want to guide my user towards? And then being able to like ground that criteria in data, right? So not just like picking, okay, I tried it 5 times and it kind of works 5 times, but we're in this era where, like you really have this very, very, very long tail. And that is kind of the key problem with machine learning, which is so many tasks are very hard to capture in like small data sets. So you really then like take that criteria, ground that in data, and then really think about, this inviolatable condition that I care about a lot, how many times does it get violated, with the understanding that it's never going to be 0. You're in like non-deterministic land. You're always going to have some sort of failures, but like what's your susceptibility to that, which really varies for people, for everyone. Yesterday I was, talking to somebody who kept asking me, when you talk to your customers, what is the hallucination rate that they see and what is the hallucination rate that's acceptable to them? And that question, right? Like, what's a hallucination rate that's acceptable to people? Like, it's an impossible to answer question. Like, even for me versus, for a financial institution that uses guardrails versus, for somebody who is doing an indie hacking project, hallucination rate acceptability criteria is vastly different. So depending on like, in terms of, how you, given this like post metrics land that we're all in right now, like how do you still execute really quickly while balancing safety, is to like think upfront about like, what does success look like for me? And then once you kind of like build it out, like try to ground that success in some data, so is 5% hallucination bad? Like tie that to some KPI or to some, product metric that's important, and then kind of build accordingly.
I'd also add to think about the reputational risk to your company. Like if your company is building something that's like a fun, goofy consumer social media, like maybe you have it's fine, it's more fun. But if your company's brand and trust and differentiator is having authority and being trustworthy and being reliable and being accurate, like maybe this is not the technology for you. Like skip it. I don't know. And I think of the New York City government had a chat bot that gave advice about business permits and for small businesses, et cetera. And it started giving misinformation, incorrect information. Really bad, very bad. Like I would say not at all worth building that, because you want the government to be trustworthy. You do not want your the people living in your city or living in your country not to trust the government. I mean, people don't trust the government, very much already. So I don't know. It's always a choice not to use it, and yeah, I don't know. You don't have to get on this bandwagon.
So I see that everything is very particular to the use case. But what I'm wondering is there any complexity triggered by the technology, the audience, the industry. So maybe let's start with the technology. Like if we look at pure, like just prompt engineering or fine tuning or some RAG applications, like are there some very specific risk associated to those technologies that needs to be taken care of?
Yeah, I think I think not owning the model and the models kind of being this black box that is hidden behind an API for this like completely different organization. I think that introduces a lot of risk. So essentially, for I think a lot of people here might use LLM as a judge style of evals, right? Where you essentially throw stuff at an LLM and ask it, does this look right or not, yes or no, right? I think if you run that experiment multiple times without changing any input, etc., you'll kind of see that you just get different results, each time. And so if you were to aggregate it, that's not like reliable. So essentially, like if you look at it with how it used to be before, right, which is like what's the delta with LLMs? Earlier, even though models were black boxes and you had like these small models that were neural networks and weren't interpretable, you would still have a lot of consistency. Like you own the training data, you could set the seed, you could set, like the inference stack, etc. And that meant that even if it wasn't this magical answer anything model, you still kind of like knew where you stood with that model. Now that a company, you don't even own like model updates. Like, your model provider, like maybe under the scenes, like ships a new model, for the same like GPT 3.5 version or something, right? That means that it makes it really hard to understand like what you're really signing up for when you build an application. And so the fix for that, right, is to like, this is what I kind of suggest if any of you are interested in shipping this, which is when you're in that land, and if you think that you can benefit from using LLMs for any stack, the key thing to focus on is like, what is the inviolatable criteria that is important to me, as an application builder, and thinking about whatever you build from that criteria perspective, rather than, just like from a, this looks good on, like a handful of examples or in demo or something. And so it's kind of good to go.
Yeah, I also think that there's a middle ground that you can take, and I'm curious if any of the people that you work with do this, of using LLMs to annotate data and then train more traditional machine learning models on that data. Neural networks are powerful models, and in many of the applications that I see people using could be solved with very high accuracy with just a plain neural network. And so if you have the capability of training your own models, that's a way to get consistency, much more sort of observability into what's going on. You can then go edit the data, upsample the data, et cetera.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, I guess so. We do see that a bunch, and we've done a bunch of work on it ourselves as well for like guardrails, for example, under the hood RML model. So we do this for a bunch of things. I think it's consistent. And you can shape your data and you end up getting the results that you want, but it's not, it's not as robust as on an outer distribution example as an LLM would be. So let's say you train some data, right? That data looks a certain way. Now in production, you end up getting a data point that looks completely different. It's not reflected in the data set that you have. If I were a betting person, if I had to make a bet, I would bet on an LLM with like, nicely outlined instructions to handle that outer distribution example better than your small, consistent, fine-tuned model would. And that's where that balance kind of has to come in.
So we're getting quite tight on time. So I just want to touch on one last topic, which is the people perspective on risk. Who do you think, who are you involving at the moment when it comes to risk? Like which departments, which role are involved in those discussions? And also, Shreya, who do you recommend and who do you see in other companies?
So I think it's the product owner. If you're a large enterprise, also the risk and compliance teams typically end up getting involved in the later stages of development. And then finally, it's the data science or dev teams that implement or evaluate how much that risk is actually present in your data. So those three stakeholders: product owner, risk and compliance teams, and then the actual developers that enforce like whatever risk mitigation strategies.
Yeah, I agree with that. Legal. I mean, depending on what industry you're in, you have to know what regulatory framework you lie under. And even though tech broadly is not regulated in the United States, we do have lots of regulations of other industries, and there's technology companies that work in those industries. And so that is a hard constraint if you're rolling these out. So you should know that, and you should talk to your friendly neighborhood lawyers about that. I work. It's maybe not that applicable to a lot of you, but I work in media. We actually have an editorial arm, and I find that journalists are really good at poking holes in questions, defining good questions and poking holes in things. So I actually always involve my editorial partners in these types of questions about defining. We actually have like contracts. We write our constitutions of how the product should work with very specific language, and it's very helpful actually to be to have people with that kind of background involved in the process.
Well, Erica, Shreya, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much for the audience to see everything filling as we talk, and that was wonderful. Thank you so much.